It's David, Taboo Customs again. We're on to part 2 now of our CJ5's no plow Jeep and eventual restoration project. So this part of the videos, we will take a look at a couple of things, more things we found out about the Jeep since we bought it. And then we'll take a look at what we're doing for the first steps before we fire it up and as we do fire it up. So the first thing we'll take a look at is a couple of things that we found since we've taken the top off. So we have taken the top off, taken it outside because we aren't going to reuse that top. We did confirm it was a pre-76 top. For some reason though, they decided to modify the doors to try to fit what they thought was the door, but actually should have fit anyway. So we're not quite sure what they did there, but we'll leave that alone. It's thrown outside now. So the other thing that was interesting that we did find was they manufactured a sort of hand throttle down here, which is not unusual as the CJs, the 258 and the Carter carburetors start to have issues. You know, a lot of times the issues were with idling. So you know, when I was younger, I perfected the pressing 3 pedals with 2 feet, but apparently they've added a little homemade hand throttle here to be able to control the throttle, it looks like. The other interesting thing, and we kind of pointed this out in the first video, was we weren't quite sure what they did here. So what we're going to do now is we're actually going to take this, we're going to open it up and kind of see what this looks like. And my guess is it's pretty ugly. Looks like we got several layers of electrical tape. And we won't be reusing this roll bar, obviously. And wow, think about on the 3rd layer electrical tape. Okay, so so you kind of see why they covered it up. So it looks like they cut it with something, maybe a hard wheel, maybe a plasma cutter. It then looks like they did heat it up and then they bent it back over and taped it up so it wouldn't look so bad. But yeah, you can tell we'll obviously get rid of this roll bar at a minimum, even if we do keep the tub. So to get it to turn over and to get it to fire, we obviously need 2 major things. The electrical system, the starting system to work, ignition system. We're starting with the starting system just to get it to turn over, and the fuel system. So look at the starting system. We kind of started going through things, you know, and everything was hooked up. There are a couple of odd things like this cable here. It's actually a side post ground cable, but they attached it to one of the cheap terminals, the battery ends, the cable ends from, you know, any kind of store. So we'll end up replacing these cable ends anyway, making sure we have good connections with the battery, especially if we're going to run the plow with this. It's going to, you know, we're going to need a decent battery, decent alternator. And we pulled a battery out of an old Jeep we had outside for now, just to get us going. But once we got this all set up and connected, we actually did find that the starter and everything, the solenoid, the starter, the ignition, I mean, those would be the 3 main areas that we could have issues. That we didn't have any issues. Actually, it turns right over and it turns over well. Now, before we did do that, we did disconnect the fuel pump from both the tank and the carburetor, just to make sure we didn't want to pump a bunch of garbage through because we know it sat for a while. So the next thing we did was we started to look at the fuel system, and to do that, you know, the first thing I wanted to verify was does the fuel pump even work? So we took a little can of gas, we put it down in here, ran a hose for the inlet of the fuel pump down into that just to check and see if it worked, and as we figured, it did not pump. So we'll take a look at that here in a second, and then we'll talk about the gas tank as well and how we handled that. So obviously, once we found that the starting system was good to go, you know, the starter and everything worked fine, the next big system, and the biggest system of any Jeep that's probably going to cause problems for you if it's been sitting for a long time, is going to be the fuel system. And going back and pulling the filler, the cap off the gas tank, you know, we could tell, you know, it smelled like varnish. So we knew we were in for probably a lot of replacing in the fuel system. And as we started looking at it, it was very evident. So starting by looking at the hoses, you know, these were the hoses that were actually connected to the fuel pump, and you can see that pretty much the hoses have disintegrated. They're all cracked, and pretty much all the hosing from the fuel tank, anyway, the soft line hosing will have to be replaced from the fuel tank to the carburetor. The next step is we started pulling the fuel filters, and when we pulled the fuel filters, we noticed something on the inlet. And this Jeep actually had 2 fuel filters, which is good, because like I said, I've bought some that have none. And this is very good that had 2 fuel filters, because we pulled the first fuel filter, which was in front of the pump. We noticed that the inlet was pretty dirty. So we went ahead and we cut that fuel filter apart, and you can see that pretty much that fuel filter was just packed with dirt. So, you know, this is a lot of reason, and when we get back to the fuel tank, I'll explain why I think this had so much dirt in it. But this was a big reason why this Jeep did not run right anymore. So luckily they did have 2 fuel filters. This was the one in front of the pump, and I also cut the one behind the pump open. We'll take a look at that one as well. But first we'll talk a little bit about the pump. So this was the pump that was on it. I've actually cut it open so I can kind of explain how it works and what happens. Now, similar to the hoses, this has a diaphragm in it that will crack and can get a hole. And it's hard to see, probably hard to see in the videos, but it is going to be cracked here, and we know it didn't work. And the way this works is the camshaft will pull this diaphragm up and down, and there's 2 valves in here. There's on the inlet valve, there's a one-way valve that will only pull fuel in, and once it goes to pump up, this valve will close, and once this goes to push out, this valve will push the fuel out, but it won't pull it back in. So with this, if either of those valves or this diaphragm goes bad, the pumps go bad. Luckily, these pumps are pretty cheap. They're still only about 25 bucks. So we've thrown a new pump on our engine now, so we're all squared away there. Now on the second fuel filter, and this is the fuel filter up by the carburetor. So this is the one that had an inlet, had 2 outlets because it had a return as well connected to it. This one wasn't nearly as dirty, mainly because we did have that initial, but it would look just as bad as that one. You can see there was some dirt that did get past that, but what you'll really notice is this was actually the bottom of the fuel filter here. You can see how the fuel that was left in that fuel filter basically, you know, turned into a hard substance once it dried up and evaporated, and you know, would have been something that would plug up the fuel filter more, and we'll see some of that when we take a look at the carburetor here. Now obviously with all of this, you know, we pretty much knew that the carburetor was probably going to be pretty bad. And looking at rebuild kits online on eBay, we ended up, you know, finding that we could buy a new carburetor on eBay for 60 bucks. So we're going to try that out. We're going to see how that goes. So we did actually buy a totally new carburetor off of eBay. Normally I've rebuilt a lot of these carburetors, so I wasn't too worried about rebuilding it. But with, you know, knowing all of this, we decided, all right, we'll just go ahead and we'll try a new carburetor, see how that works out for us. But I did go ahead and pull this carburetor apart so we could take a look at it and see. Now, pulling these apart's not too hard. There's 3 linkage rods that are, I think there's 1 or 2 on this side and 1 on this side. Basically disconnect with a couple of C-clips, so C-clip on one end and they pull out of the other. You know, you can see here. So once you do that, you've got 6 bolts around the top here, and then you can pull the top off, which when we did, we actually had to pry this off. And you can kind of see on the inside, you know, the pump here, the pump's pretty much gone. There's a lot of residue from dried gasoline that's in here. And then when we start to pull out the float out of the bottom, you can start to see all of the residue down in the bottom and the dirt that made it into the carburetor. So So I mean, we could have tried to rebuild this, but I definitely think we're on the right track and just going ahead and replacing this carburetor with a new one and going from there. Now the first setup for that carburetor, what I'll do is I'll go and I'll check these settings. I'll screw the screws all the way in, the adjustment screws, and then I'll count how many turns it took to screw all those all the way in, and then I'll set that carburetor the same, and then start my adjustments from there when we do get it running. So with the issues we knew we were having with the filters and everything on the front end, I knew there was going to be problems when we got back here to the fuel tank, and we kind of found, you know, I think what was causing some of the issues with the dirt in the filters. And we've already cleaned up this tank a bit, quite a bit actually. So what we found was whenever we pulled this tank out and we were looking at the sending unit, this sending unit was actually held in. I mean, the ring was in there, but it was only about half in there. So I don't know if they just couldn't get it in there all the way. And then they decided to just go ahead and put JB Weld across around the top. And when they did that, they didn't actually JB Weld the whole thing. They left a gap, and I think that gap actually allowed, you know, dirt and mud. And you can see the top of the tank, you know, all of the similar type of dust that was in the filter. So I think a lot of that just washed into the tank as they, you know, went out wheeling this Jeep or whatever they did with it. And you can see here, I think part of the reason they also JB welded it in is they were JB welding the return into the top of the sending unit. So, and these sending units, you know, are pretty common for going bad, especially as far as the issue with the fuel gauge. I mean, a lot of times it's, you know, the sending unit. Now, one of the things that will also go bad, and you can kind of see this here, all this green, you know, goo here that came out, that actually came out of the float, and the float is just full. So you'll sometimes get these where the section up here will go bad, and in a second here we'll kind of show you how to check that. And then you'll get these where the float will actually start to go bad. It'll get soft. And you can see there, I mean, it's soft, and I can actually hear it, you know, starting to squeeze out, and it fills with gasoline, and then, you know, your float pretty much doesn't float anymore. I'll go along with that. The actual bottom section of this basically just disintegrated, cracked, broke off, because this piece actually was down here, and there's a filter that wrapped around that, but all of that, you know, fell apart. So we pulled this out, and we've ordered a new fuel sending unit. Then we took and we tried to pull, you know, try to get whatever fuel we could out of there. And this is actually the fuel that we got out of there, and you know, it's gone. Even, you know, the interesting thing is this actually doesn't smell like varnish. You know, you smell the tank and you can smell varnish. I can kind of tell the fuel has gone really bad. This has gone past that point. It's even thicker than what you'd kind of smell. So just smelling it, you actually can't smell varnish. It's all the debris and everything in the tank that still smells like that varnish. Now, what we did with the fuel tank is we obviously had to spend a lot of time chipping away at the JB Weld or whatever they used to try to seal that in. We got this pretty well cleaned up, and I think this is good. You know, so we're going to be able to reuse this tank as far as this portion, but obviously they had a lot of gunk and debris in the bottom of it. And we looked at buying a new tank, and eventually in the future we might do that, but for now we're just trying to get this going so we can plow snow this year. So we took this and we started cleaning it. So luckily we had a warm day where we could take it outside, and the first thing we did is we put a little bit of fuel in here and kind of let it set overnight, you know, hoping that would take some of that fuel that was in the bottom and kind of loosen it up from the bottom so we could rinse it out. Then we took a handful of bolts, half-inch bolts, and you can see they're actually still in there. And what we did is we shook this around a lot just to try to loosen up as much as we could. You know, then we took it out, we rinsed it out with water, and we did that probably a good 20 times until we were able to basically rinse this out and ensure we kind of got most of the stuff out of the bottom. You know, we took a long screwdriver and tried to scrape what we could off the bottom and see how we were doing, and we were able to get quite a bit of that off the bottom, enough that we're going to go ahead and we're going to put it back together with this fuel tank and we're gonna try to get the Jeep going this year. And like I said, next year we'll look at maybe changing that out when we deal with the body. Now we did go ahead, and because we did clean this up and it's still going to have some stuff in it, we are going to go ahead and run the 2 fuel filters just like the previous owner did, having 1 fuel filter in front of the pump to try to make sure we keep any contaminants from the tank from getting to the carburetor. And we'll probably have to change that fuel filter every now and then, and we can keep an eye on it. We can open it up and then check it to see. So now what we'll do is we'll take a look at how to check your sending unit for the resistance, which is a pretty common issue when it comes to your gas gauge not working. Alright, so we'll take a look at the sending units, and we'll look at a couple of different things. We'll look at some of the differences in brands and quality, and we'll take a look at how to check the resistance between the two, or to check your resistance on one to make sure if it's working correctly for your fuel gauge or not, because this is one of the things that often will go bad when your fuel gauge is not working. So one of the things you can clearly see, and I squeeze this again so it's puking out all more fluid, this is hollow, so it is filled up with fluid, whereas, and this is a Spectra brand here, which is a $60 fuel sender versus one of these that you can still buy a brand that looks just like this. These are about $45. So this is a little bit more expensive, but it has a couple of different features. One, it doesn't have this same type of float. It has a different float. You can see it's more of a rectangular float. I believe it's actually solid, so it shouldn't fill up like these will actually fill up with fluid and stop working. The other big difference is going to be in the area that does does measure the resistance or show the resistance. You can kind of see in this, it's fairly simple. There's just a little arm and a little piece that sticks out, and it's wrapped with wires, and as it changes, the resistance should change. This here is a little bit different. It does have a plastic molded piece here that holds that same type of panel with the wires, and as it goes up and down, so there is a little bit more robust, I think probably a little bit better. So now we'll take a look and we'll show, because the way that the gas gauge works, it'll send a voltage through the wire, and it measures the resistance of that that voltage coming back to the gauge to show on the gauge what the fuel level actually is. So, and as the fuel level changes, the resistance will change. So we'll go ahead and we'll check that resistance. So we've got our multimeter here, and it's set to check the ohms, to check the resistance of our wires. And we grabbed a couple of pieces with alligator clips on them. We'll clip one to the ground, and we'll clip one to the post on the top, and then we'll attach those to the corresponding leads from the multimeter. And you can see now we're actually reading 65 ohms, and that's correct for an empty tank. So as we go up, basically filling the tank, it's going to go up to about 11, 12 ohms, 10 ohms. So, and that's the full level in the tank. So you can see as we move it up and down, the resistance will actually change. So we can take a look on our old sending unit here and see what it does. And obviously it's not in very good shape. One, if you do this on an old sending unit, you're going to want to make sure you get good connection. Which with these, obviously here we were new. These connectors are pretty rough. You see right now we're getting pretty much nothing. Yep, so you can tell, that would show you that, this fuel sending unit, the resistance measurement done by this system here is not working. So that would be a reason, along with the float actually not floating, reason why your gas gauge wouldn't be working correctly. Thanks for watching. Hopefully anything in this video helped you as far as getting an old Jeep that's been sitting for several years going, and how you might approach that If you like this video, please like, and if you want to keep following this project through, or any of our other projects, or know when we put out some new videos for our kits, please subscribe. Thank you.